Good evening, everyone. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Hayley Eber, Acting Dean of the ONS Channon School of Architecture here at the Cooper Union, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here tonight. Exactly 40 years ago, in 1983, the Storefront for Art and Architecture and the Cooper Union came together here in our Great Hall for a 3-day symposium on public art, interrogating the urban monument. And I'm thrilled that we're back here again to rekindle our long-lasting partnership. Both of our institutions have a shared commitment to social and environmental justice and a shared mission for free, open, and accessible art and architecture programs and education. As part of this partnership, Cooper Union faculty members Nora Akawi and Nina Pandit, together with Jose Esparza and Guillermo Ruiz de Teresa from Storefront and Art and Architecture, are collaborating on a new pedagogical experiment, a course here in the School of Architecture with a public component focusing on public art in New York City, framed through Winona LeDuc and Deborah Cowan's notion of elementary infrastructure, that is, decolonial infrastructures of abolition rooted in care that can open up paths to ecological justice and collective flourishing. This new phase of our partnership is launched today in our special program, engaging and celebrating the work of Amanda Williams, specifically her installation at Storefront, What Black Is This, You Say? I just want to thank our amazing speakers and performers joining us today, and to the small but mighty events team here at Cooper who makes this programming possible. So Kim Newman, Tim Marbach, our CityView AV team, as well as President Laura Sparks for generously supporting this program. So with that, I'd like to invite the inimitable Jose Esparza to the podium to please introduce this event. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, Hayley. It is a true honor and privilege to be here this evening to celebrate the long-term public artwork by Amanda Williams at Storefront for Art and Architecture. In 1993, only a few blocks away from where we're sitting tonight, Storefront commissioned a collaborative project to artist Vito Acconci and architect Stephen Hull that would forever transform the building. Their intervention replaced the existing shop window exterior with a series of 12 rotating panels that, when open, expose the gallery directly onto the sidewalk, effectively blurring the boundary between public and private space. Ever since then, this project has been a physical and visual anchor that helps us articulate Storefront's mission, which is to amplify the understanding of the changing built environment, always doing this through artistic practice. Now, 30 years later, through Amanda's powerful public artwork at Storefront, titled What Black Is This, You Say, and launched in the summer of 2021, our shape-shifting panels are more than just a blurry threshold between the inside and the outside. Amanda's project dialogues directly with the Storefront building as a way to further expand her explorations on color theory, race, and identity. As the neighborhood around us continues to transform, Storefront's presence has become a downtown landmark for many passerby, and witnessing the last few years of Amanda's work in public space has clearly showcased how the built environment can hold and unfold new narratives embedded within it. Resignifying a private building as a public artwork is an intentional effort. Artworks don't necessarily become public simply by naming them public. They become so through collective conversations and through the embrace of a community. And that is exactly what we're doing this evening, as we discuss Amanda's public artwork, What Black Is This, You Say? On view at Storefront's building at 97 Kenmare, just a 10-minute walk south of this building. Long-term visibility in public space creates possibilities for change, and this has become the driving force behind a new series of public artwork commissions at Storefront that we're calling Groundworks. We are grateful to Amanda for her trust in allowing us to present the public version of her ever-expansive, complex, and compelling project as the inaugural Groundworks Commission at Storefront. Thank you, Amanda. What Black is this, you say, brings attention to the plurality, complexity, and nuance of Black experiences. And tonight's event will be an evening of readings, propositions, conversations, and musings about the project with an amazing lineup of participants. Beginning with Andrés Hernández, Chicago-based artist, designer, educator, and longtime friend and collaborator of Amanda, who will provide a contextual analysis of her work in public space. Afterwards, J Wortham, sound healer, Reiki practitioner, herbalist, and community care worker oriented towards healing justice and liberation, who also happens to be a brilliant journalist and staff writer for the New York Times Magazine, will do a reading of their response to a color that Amanda has aptly titled New York Times Uppercase. A panel amongst Amanda, who will be joined by architect, designer, and scholar Mabel O. and transdisciplinary designer and urbanist Justin Garret Moore, will follow. Camille Bacon, who has been expertly shepherding this project from its inception, will be moderating this conversation. Our dear friend Dina Hagag unfortunately will not be able to join us tonight. But to close the night, Chicago-based poet and musician Jamila Woods will be performing. It is important to mention that this event is also a part of a forthcoming publication that expands upon Amanda's 17 colors that have been presented at Storefront over the past 2 years. All of tonight's participants are contributors to the amazing book we're currently working on and which is being designed by Polymode Studio. So please stay tuned for its release date. Presenting architecture as a site of critical discourse where notions of place and identity are interwoven is something that both Storefront and Amanda have been doing for years. And we're thrilled to be able to facilitate this gathering with Cooper Union as a partner. I would like to thank Haley Eber, Nora Akawi, Kim Newman, Tim Marbach, and everyone from Cooper Union who made this possible. The mighty team at Storefront is the mortar that holds everything together. Guillermo Ruiz de Teresa, Jessica Kwok, Eduardo Meneses, Andrea Molina, and Maya Whites. Thank you. You really are the best. Thanks also go to former Storefront team member Ginny Kanduja, who was involved in the early days of this project. Thank yous also go to the Storefront board, many of which are faculty members here at Storefront, here at Cooper. We're also grateful to the Storefront Circle, the Storefront members, and our tireless supporters who make our programs possible. The Graham Foundation, the Ruth Foundation for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, as well as the New York State Council on the Arts and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. A big shout out and massive thank you goes to Camille Bacon, who in addition to co-organizing this evening with us, is moderating a panel and is also editing the forthcoming publication about Amanda's project at Storefront. Camille has been a co-conspirator of this project ever since we met at Amanda's first public painting session at Storefront back in 2021, when she livened the mood with a loudspeaker she brought herself and blasted Whitney Houston's "How Will I Know" while painting and dancing on the sidewalk. Thank you, Camille. But the magic and all of us gathering here is all due to certified MacArthur genius, Amanda Williams. There really are no words, but thank you for your trust and for your powerful work. Thank you also go to all the brilliant and generous participants of tonight's event. and to all of you for joining us. And now I hand the mic over to Andrés Hernández.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Good evening, everyone. Got to get my presentation set up. All right. Let me try that again. Good evening, everyone. How you doing? All right. I hope you all are well. Hope you can hear me. Happy to be here. And that's me. I'll start by thanking my dear friend Amanda Williams, a.k.a. Big Ro, for bringing me into this conversation about her What Black Is This, You Say project. I have known Amanda officially since the summer of 1992. That's Bulls Championship #2 for the haters. In New York, of course. And we were in each other's orbit prior to that with overlapping circles of friends. As I wrote in an Instagram post in honor of her being named a 2022 MacArthur Fellow, since that time, quote, we've grown into teenagers to adults and seen each other's families begin and grow like weeds. We've argued, cried, laughed, snapped on fools, dreamed, questioned, rhymed, brainstormed, traded, drank, represented, traveled, interviewed, worried, ranted, and all types of other things friends do together over the years, end quote. It's an honor to write and speak about her work, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to do so this evening. I'd also like to thank the good folks at Storefront for Art and Architecture and Cooper Union for sponsoring this symposium, and Camille Bacon for pulling it and us all together, and for a great editorial eye on my essay. I have the good fortune of being the opening act for Jamila Woods tonight. Not too many people can say that. See, that's what y'all are really here for her. I get it, it's all good. And I have about 27 minutes left, so without further delay, let's get into it. I offer an excerpt from Ralph Ellison's 1952 novel, Invisible Man. Quote, brothers and sisters, my text this morning is the blackness of blackness. And the congregation of voices answered, that blackness is most black, brother. Most black, end quote. My talk tonight is a soft remix of my essay, formerly known as Never Black, and also formerly known as Turn Up the Blackness or Fear of a Dark Chocolate City, and now known as Mighty Black Walls, The Blackness of Blackness, which will be published in Amanda's forthcoming What Black Is This You Say monograph. In the interest of time, I've omitted a few things from the original essay, and I've also created a mashup with another ongoing writing project of mine, What We Mean When We Say Black Space. So I hope it's all clear and that you all are able to enjoy it. Oh, and you should buckle up because you're going to hear the word black a lot tonight. Like a lot. Mighty Black Walls, the blackness of blackness. I offer an excerpt from Baba Hakeem Madbuti's 1968 poem, The Wall, which is based on The Wall of Respect by Obasi in Chicago. Baba Hakeem writes, quote, the mighty black wall about our business, blackness, can you dig? End quote. This rumination on the most black space of blackness rests comfortably on doubly black walls. These mighty black walls were formed through the continued existence, insistence, persistence, and spatial resistance of blackness. These are black walls that never fail, rebuking gravity, entropy, falling. Never quite disappeared, these mighty black walls remain. There remains special, spatial palimpsests. Black walls beget public black spaces, or perhaps amplify the existing undiscovered blackness beneath and within their immediate, not quite black contexts. Given this, what might black walls teach us about the blackness of spaces, whether painted black or otherwise? For the purposes of this discussion, we will consider then several concepts. One, blackness as malleable spatial material. 2, blackness or black walls as cultural archives. 3, blackness not as a color solely. 4, black surfaces as thick space. And 5, finally, blackness as persistent spatial residue. From black IG squares to the black public square, blackness as malleable spatial material. I offer an excerpt from Bell Hooks' 1995 essay, Black Vernacular, Architecture as Cultural Practice. Rest in peace, Bell Hooks. Quote, I learned to see freedom as always and intimately linked to the issue of transforming space, end quote. In response to an initial music industry call to action in protest of police brutality, racism, and white supremacy, on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020, the social media platforms Facebook and Instagram suddenly went black. One by one, presumably black protesters and their allies flooded the platform's respective feeds with black squares. Accompanying these ciphers was the explanatory hashtag Blackout Tuesday. This was mass black refusal, a visual strike against the systems whose very existence thrived from steady supplies of black content, even as their black audiences rarely profited from their creative generosity. This day of blackness would henceforth be known as Blackout Tuesday. As the story goes, Amanda Williams' What Black Is This, you say, was born from this digital activist context gone black. Employing the use logic of the Instagram platform, Amanda made no announcement, no public declarations of her own protest in black. Instead, mostly black square imagery emerged daily, accompanied by black social commentaries narrated from the second person perspective. Quote, you thought getting Obama elected meant you could take a break from blackness, end quote, for instance. These were the thoughts of the black people, your people and mine alike, the things we heard out loud within the protected confines of our own black communities, online or in real life, but never out in public in front of mixed company. Her sleight of hand protest of the initial call for public protest resulted in a parallel black space that looked inward at itself in an outward manner. As she held up a digital black mirror to her own lived experience and identity, her audience was left to ponder, what might her next black say about how we feel, think about, and misunderstand blackness? As an artist educated and professionally trained in the field of architecture, Amanda is no stranger to understanding space as a malleable creative medium. Often invisible to the untrained eye, it is space and not merely physical structure that is the stuff of architecture. Through the Instagram iteration of What Black Is This, you say, Amanda deftly architected screen space, reclaiming its flat black pixels as workable social spatial material. The steady accumulation of black squares and black colloquialisms on her account beyond Blackout Tuesday constructed then a de facto public black square, a digital black space, black in colors. In the quiet loudness of the comment section of each of her black posts, the artist and her followers co-constructed a space for black voices from the colored material of their own black dialogue. Less than a year later, Amanda's black square of screen space migrated to the physical space of the slivered Storefront building, offering new space for her public examination of blackness to continue out loud and now in person. Right there, that one. Monuments of Beautiful Blackness, Black Walls as Cultural Archives. I offer an excerpt from Usini Perkins' poetry from the 1968 book West Wall, Proud of Being Black. Quote, dig them boss creations, beautiful monuments of blackness for black people to dig, end quote. The public art iteration of What Black Is This, you say, differs significantly from other mighty black walls in its representational approach to blackness. It substitutes black portraitures with variegated swaths of blackness, actively resisting the desire for respectable black images. Concerned less with the representational politics of previous black generations, it captures and extracts the critical, often unheard vernacular of black cultural insiders and refashions these as highly visible speech acts. The 17 black statements displayed across the storefront's temporarily black facade are loud in their publicness, despite not actually saying anything out loud. In doing so, the silent protest of Blackout Tuesday, a counterfoil to the loudness of the simultaneous protests in the streets during summer 2020, is revoiced through a powerful textual blackness. Through What Black Is This, you say, Amanda archives and presents the complexities of black interiority publicly. Its absence of black image provides space for the presence of black voice. Its power lies not in what blackness is seen, but what blackness is said and overheard. The work's black statements are pulled from the hush harbors of both urban and rural black communities. The barbershops, the stoops, the corners, the beauty salons, the basketball courts, living rooms, and backyards, spaces below and beyond. These statements are placed, have places, and we are instantly transported to these black spaces upon hearing these words spoken back to us, back at us, bringing us back home to our own blackness. There is both anonymity and a familiarity with these statements as we mine our own memories for fragments of conversations. These are words our own family, friends, and neighborhood characters have proclaimed. These are the statements of anybody, nobody, and somebody in particular all at once, their narrator faded to black invisibility, hidden behind a veil of blackness, yet camped within the black-coated facade. This black wall indeed speaks to us, at us, beckoning us to engage in its discursive black space, its surface a physical archive of the vernacular wisdom of unsung heroes of black communities. 4 or 5 ways to be black. Blackness not as a color solely. I offer an excerpt from Gwendolyn Brooks' 1980 poem, Primer for Blacks. Quote, blackness, the black of it, the rust red of it, the milk and cream of it, the tan and yellow tan of it, the deep brown, middle brown, high brown of it, the olive and ochre of it, blackness marches on, end quote. For Amanda, blackness as color is never solely one black. Quote, but color is everything to me. You can't just say black. Which one? End quote, she asks. Her conceptual acknowledgement of the color black as not simply black provided a rainbow of blackness under whose arc she could then continue her engagement with the oft-overlooked stuff of blackness. The interaction of What Black Is This, you say, on the Storefront for Art and Architecture's facade is consciously doubled, self-aware in both its blackness and blackness, such that Amanda's examination of blackness as color vis-a-vis blackness as cultural identity turns our implicit assumptions about the color black on its head. The facade's irregular patchwork of black colors serves as a physical corollary to the gridded black squares of Amanda's post-Blackout Tuesday Instagram experimentation. This black wall asserts, quote, more than 4 or 5 ways to be black, providing an expansively dark-colored palette. Amanda blackens each of the 12 movable facade panels with separate versions of black paint, subtly animating the base coat black of the fixed-in-place parts of its elevation. Each black panel troubles our assumptions of what black is as a color, appropriating the manufactured array of blackness of commercial paint. The blackness of the facade intersects the factual blackness of African descent people in the U.S., asserting depth and complexity rarely attributable to Black people. Looking closely at the spectrum of Blackness on the storefront facade, we are made deeply aware of monocultural understandings of and responses to Black as color. Amanda refuses flattening by offering an infinite number of Blacks befitting the infiniteness of Blackness. In her world, Blackness is far too complex to exist singularly. Its thrival, not a word, depends on its pluralities. The instability of Blackness is what makes it so dangerous, as the inability of others to accurately define and thus potentially limit Blackness suggests its actual potency and magic. Black is Black is Black is Black, and yet Black is not, and Black ain't, just Black. Blackness, then, is a project of expansion, not compression, absorbing all of the myriad Blacks along its steady passage. In what Black is this, you say, Blackness exists as a double Black negative, negating possible obscurity and resisting self-sacrifice. In this instance, two Blacks, a Black wall and its Black statements, can't, won't, don't cancel each other out, instead doubling down, expanding, providing symbiotic sanctuary for the other. Blackness don't die, it multiplies on the page, on the wall, on the underground, in public space. Rendering the poché, it's one of those fancy French terms, of Blackness, Black surfaces as thick space. I offer an excerpt from Greg Foster Rice's 2014 essay, The Dynamism of the City, Urban Planning and Artistic Responses to the 1960s and 70s. Quote, while the building itself was not open for occupancy and use, the screen of the mural functioned as a definite point of civic engagement, a meeting place, and a proscenium for music and poetry performances, end quote. What Black is this, you say, is notable here as a practice of marking Black space. I offer this term as an identification of one form of Black spatial practice and acknowledge when Black people engage in marking a space with culturally accepted signifiers of Blackness, the stuff of Blackness, or actual Black material, they are simultaneously and explicitly making de facto Black space. This newly formed space, transformed by Blackness, provides an inhabitable and hospitable haven for Black existence and Black life in the midst of persistent anti-Blackness. The concept of marking Black space has at its foundation the assertion that Blackness thickens space and expands the necessarily bound limitations and semi-protective barriers of architectural building envelopes for the architectural nerds and building folks in here. The functional space of walls and facades is rendered thicker through the arrival of Black occupants who mark the space with tangible Black material culture, orality, movement, and sound, and make it their own, transforming these spaces for Black inhabitation, however temporary. Indeed, Black space is almost always temporary, ephemeral, fleeting, as its very existence is in opposition to the normative space of dominant culture, which, quote, demands acquiescence for access, for acceptance, end quote. Acts of marking Black space can be understood then as tactical rather than strategic in nature, as these seek not the permission of power and instead erect zones of Black freedom whenever and wherever possible for as long as sustainably possible. Much like air mattresses, Black space swells and expands to support the weight of Black subjects and their bodies as needed, offering a temporarily thickened surface that quickly contracts for ease of portability and movement. Let us consider then the actual thinness of the blackened surface of what black is this, you say, in comparison to its proposed thickness as a habitable black public square. In this scenario, the storefront's flexible and maneuverable facade extends inwards into its thin triangular footprint and outwards towards its flanking sidewalk and street corner to form a stout poche of blackness. For those unfamiliar, the French term poche is an architectural term used to describe the non-occupiable solid space of walls or floors of a building or structure. When rendered in plan or section, these spaces are often hatched or blackened on architectural drawings to differentiate them from occupiable spaces. However, we learned this in architecture school, the poche of a building's plan or section also provides opportunities to literally shape the interior and exterior spaces of the structure and can be considered then as malleable material for spatial composition. Marking black space in this manner creates an outward public space of and for black interiority. The intentional pliability of Storefront's facade becomes thickened by the newfound blackness of black vernacular statements inscribed upon it, as the physical interior of the storefront building merges with the exterior public space of the adjacent sidewalk to form black space. Its thickness, its poche, entraps passerby and inhabitants alike, engaging them in a spatial and cultural dialogue. This iteration of what black is this, you say, intersects architecture with the social cultural space of blackness, thickening the spatial potential of the slivered storefront space to embrace what might typically be shut out by the whiteness of the white cube, as the original whiteness of the exhibition box designated it as rarefied space not fully for public consumption. The blackness and blackness of the building envelope marks and makes space for it to be anything and everything the black imagination can conjure, extending the space to accommodate the previously uninvited and undesirable. We almost there, y'all. Turned up the black. Blackness as persistent spatial residue. I offer an excerpt from Parliament's 1975 song, Chocolate City. Y'all gonna test my singing abilities tonight, sorry. Gaining on ya. Moving in and on ya. Gaining on ya. Can't you feel my breath? Ha. Gaining on ya. All up around your neck. Ha ha. End quote. I'm almost there. Uh-oh, I lost my presentation. No, we had a rhythm. Give me a second, y'all. Lost my notes. Got too pumped up with Parliament, apparently. Yeah. Let's go back. I'm gonna hum in the time being. Okay. All right, let me go back now. There we go. Push too many buttons. Sorry, y'all. It happens, right? All right. Let me go back. Gaining on you. Gaining on you. All right. Having now described the concept of marking black space, let us turn our attention next to its lingering impact on normative, read or read, white space. As much as acts of marking and making black space are ephemeral and nomadic in nature, these acts are less concerned with the ethics of leaving small footprints on the environments they transgress. Much to the chagrin of the dominant, again, red or read white culture, black space markers unapologetically leave trails of blackness wherever they go, sullying the overprotected, overpoliced whiteness of normative space. One doesn't go high to embrace the hypocritical spatial ethics of the low, those who would slash and burn space before allowing you to access it. No, this blackness is steadfast and unfixed in its positionality, unbound by the strictures of normative social spatial codes. Marked black space resists normative space and normalizes tactical wedging into its landscape, both physical and effective, to open access for all. Marked black space is the cracked open back door, the unlocked gate, the propped window of the white spatial imagination that forgot to set the alarm before leaving the house. Why does the fact of being black in normative space, or the idea of marking black space, trouble non-blacks so? What is the root of this fear of a marked black space? I suggest that dominant society is keenly aware of the ways blackness lingers spatially and continues to rear its ugly head long after it has vacated the premises, right? You don't have to go home, but you got to get the hell out of here, right? Blackness is elusive in its spatial containment, despite the multitude of forces operating against it politically, legally, and socially. There is a heightened anxiety that once a neighborhood property space goes black, it will never go back. Its immediate devaluation prompted by the first instance of black inhabitation. Dominant society assumes that a black spatial turn is a turn for the worst, a spiraling descent into the depravity and bankruptcy of blackness. When blackness turns up spatially, it is turned up socially in the process. Normative spaces can be turned black rather quickly if one isn't paying attention. So someone is always paying attention until there are no longer any like-minded citizens to serve watch. Conversely, black space markers recognize that blackness is always ever bubbling beneath the surface and delicately floating within the spatial ether. Black space doesn't just turn up out the blue, it is turned up through identifying its geospatial coordinates. All our physical locations are subliminally black, intuitively black, and like divining rods for water sources, the intuition of black space markers helps them locate latent black essence and amplify it as necessary. Black space is turned up through acts of marking black space for pleasure, for purpose, and sometimes just cause it can be turned up black, despite what you think. When the blackness of space is turned up, there is a tacit recognition that this space has aesthetically, visually, sonically, olfactorily, and demographically turned itself towards blackness. The uncovered sensoria of blackness, perhaps then, makes this space a little louder, a little brighter and more colorful, a little more pungent, and as often feared, a little more dangerous. What black is this, you say, turns up the blackness of the storefront for art and architecture and its immediate surroundings. In its explicit valuing of black public space in the midst of a social spatial context of anti-blackness, the institution embraces its new identity as marked black space. The very shell of its structure is literally turned black and turned black simultaneously, boldly embracing an encroachment of blackness and all that it brings with it and leaves behind. As such, Storefront walks the fine edge between the performed solidarity of mainstream companies, institutions, and organizations during and as a result of the original Blackout Tuesday, and a deep and sustained commitment to eradicating racism and white supremacy within the fields of art and architecture and its very own organizational structure. What does it mean, then, for a non-black institution to wear its blackness so boldly and for so long? Storefront has turned black and turned up its blackness, announcing this is a space welcoming of blackness in all its forms. Epilogue. Once you go black, you never go backward. The facade of the storefront for art and architecture will have evolved from never black to very black to post-black. If, as the saying goes, once you go black, you never go back, in what ways can one not return to whiteness, if at all? What residue remains institutionally after the black paint and its black statements are gone? Or does this colored signification remain a permanent layer of blackness, quietly smoldering below the surface of a future painted, perhaps whitewashed facade? Perhaps then we might reconsider what black is this, you say, not as a bold application of blackness, but a strategic removal or displacement of whiteness. As a black wellspring has now been located here, we can become witnesses, stewards, beneficiaries, and activators of its liberatory potential, or suppress its latent energies, turning down the blackness. What's next for a post-black storefront? The black paint can't go back in the can, and what's been said or written across the facade in this case can't be unheard or unread. What does one gain by returning to the before times other than comfort in the familiar? Given this, I firmly believe the institution will be continuously transformed for the better as it critically listens to and engages with its surrogate black identity and ultimately acts on its behalf. In the meantime, I offer Storefront 2 suggestions. 1, when in doubt, paint it black, period. And 2, for all of y'all, please protect black spaces, those black in color or otherwisely colored black. Thank you. So besides being an opening act and yelling into the microphone, I also have the good fortune of welcoming J Wortham to the stage. Thank you, J Wortham. Come join us.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, that was incredible, Andrés. Hi, everybody. I am J Wortham, and I'm so honored to be here tonight. Thank you to Amanda for being a beacon and an inspiration and someone whose work is a guiding light in my own practices and ethics of care and stewardship for Black dignity in life. Thank you to everyone here at Cooper Union for having us, the crew, the caretakers, and the workers staying late to facilitate this program. Also, shout out to Camille Bacon for all your grace and patience and just, kindness with me in this process and me being delayed. I was very thrilled to be commissioned to respond to one of Amanda's shades of Black at the Storefront. I'll read the caption selected for me, and my response as follows. Okay. Me, myself personally, I'm a lowercase b, sometimes a queen bee, every once in a while the baddest bee, but the next time I appear in the New York Times, I'll be an uppercase B. When you talk about us, make sure we look good. Make sure we sound good. In the 1920s, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote letter after letter to publishers, including the New York Times, asserting that the use of a small letter for the name of 12 million Americans and 200 million human beings is a personal insult. His appeals were rejected, ignored. By 1930, the Times agreed to capitalize Negro, noting, "It is not merely a typographical change, it is an act in recognition of racial respect for those who have been generations in lowercase." That inn perched tall like a hat, silky fur draped across shoulders, rings glimmering on every single finger for 30-plus years. By the 1960s, that sheen had dulled. Black was beautiful, and we took that beauty for ourselves. The price was trading that uppercase N for a lowercase b. We were Black, and we wore it well. It stayed that way until the summer of 2020. A few months into the uprisings, the whole world watching, Mark Lacey, national editor for the New York Times, described the change as the difference between a color and a culture. Yeah, make that B bigger. Add an extra story to the house. Climb those stairs, one level up. Look out the picture window. Drape us in that extra space. That extra bubble, bold like a balloon, a pocket of oxygen. Big enough to sustain those forging ahead. Never stop finding your place in it. A second level added to a complicated house, a complicated history, a complicated category that represents so much more than culture. And atomizing new cosmologies, recognition and denial, held in the same clenched fist. We still want more than banners painted in streets, digital purses open, street names changed, holidays given, a news story on our public house. But we took it, we celebrated what we saw as a beginning. One truth is that we is a complicated project. We are trying to name a lost world, a shared history, a path that is still unfolding. We are forever searching for a million new ways to describe who we are and how we are, in tongues forgotten. We aren't even a we anymore, a million cultures fractured in their own rightful places. We are that which is to come, like Sylvia Wynter said. 5 letters for 500 million ways to be. We aren't stopping at the B, we want the rest too, and we'll take it, for it does not just belong to us. It belongs to those who are continuing on, who will be traveling ahead towards the horizon of our futurity, towards our next new knowing. We are not done yet, but we're here right now. And like Miss Lucille said, we are changed changers. I continue to continue what I have been. Most of my lives is where I'm going, from the poem, I Am Not Done Yet by Lucille Clifton. Thanks, y'all.
Hello, everyone. My name is Camille Bacon. I'm a writer and also the self-proclaimed president of the Amanda Williams Fan Club. I will be moderating tonight's conversation in place of Dina Hagag, who unfortunately can't join us tonight, but is here in spirit. But today I'm joined by, of course, artist Amanda Williams, architect, architect and scholar Mabel O. Wilson, and philanthropic program officer and professor Justin Garret Moore. So Amanda's call to come paint with her came in May of 2021. Mabel, I believe you were there as well, indeed. And it was really at a moment when we were still learning to be together again in physical space. And the collective spirit of the work, and Amanda, your willingness to kind of share the responsibility of laying the paint on the facade with so many hands, gave us not only an opportunity to convene together, but also to remember in real time how to work together and how to collaborate with longtime friends and also strangers. And so while the work is an aesthetic and conceptual and spatial undertaking, the kind of essence of mutuality and togetherness that you gathered us in turns the work also into a gesture of intimacy and connection. And, you know, amidst such an uncertain time, which of course continues, you reminded us that peril is not the only way through which we come to know one another and to regard one another. And with that, I think generally the built environment negates Blackness and negates Black life. And so my first question is for you, Justin and Mabel, in thinking about how, as we try to reimagine who is included in the public of public art, how What Black Is This You Say kind of poses a critique of how that public is defined or not defined.
Great, thank you, Camille, and of course, thank you to Amanda for raising a question, an important question. And I think it's important for us to remember the context for this conversation. Where did these black squares come from? And it came from an interaction with a human being in a public space, on a sidewalk in a street, right? This is a conversation fundamentally based in people in public, and what does that interaction mean? What are the rights to space? What are the rights to be human in our society? And as the built environment is framing that. And so when we ask this question about who the public is, the question that you're raising, what black is this? It is a multitude, right? It is multiple and universal at the same time. And that is something that has not been accepted by our society in so many ways, because the universal figure has been a certain subject, which is not the multitude, right? And so questioning that in public, Whitney on the speaker, while you're on the sidewalk, being loud in the space, being quiet in the space, moving in the space, being still in the space, all of that is the reframing, the questioning, and the redefinition for how we need to think about our multiplicity, our complexity in public space and as public actors. And so this question, this framing, is something that we have to think about. What is our collective responsibility to each other about that public space, right? So the young woman who was recording what happened to George Floyd and bringing in, that's that thickened space, right? So for what's happening to public, to being something that is in the public sphere that engages a wider responsibility for how we're constructing our society, our interactions, and our responsibilities. So public art, public space really are rooted in that connection that we have with each other, just simply as humans, and what we think about our responsibilities to each other are, but also what our connections and engagements and allowing for that thickness.
Just follow up. I just want to say thank you. I think this is a really great, I felt like I went to church previously. And also thank you, Amanda. This is just a great opportunity to continue ongoing conversations. And, what I really appreciate about that work, and I just feel, this question of black is, black ain't. I think there's a way in which black is always designated as an enclosure, as captivity, as not valuable, as not human, as, like all of these things that basically degrade the condition of living as black. And what I appreciate about what Amanda did in the method, the poetic method, right, that is beyond architecture and more, was that you said black is many things, right? Black is, black ain't, but like all of the capaciousness of blackness offers so many ways of being, despite what they say black is. And that's what I find so powerful about that. And I think that, we're trained in the world of architecture, and it has a hard time, opening itself out too, because of the nature of its own disciplinarity, right, and control and enclosure. And so I think that work offers just so much richness, as your whole color theory project and all of the ways that you have developed these methods of like making spaces.
I wonder also for you, Mabel, if we can think about what black is this you say as a mode of refusal, perhaps a mode of refusal of who is allowed in black space, what black space is, what black space is not, and perhaps if you could speak to, if we are to say that what black is this you say does enact a kind of refusal, what new possibilities for the built environment open out from the storefront facade after Amanda has made this intervention?
Well, I just think being there, being loud, and having music already changed. It just changes the nature of how that space is policed, because I've seen, how the rules of what you can and cannot do. You have to get permission. You can only make so much noise. There's a way, of policing black presence constantly in this city, in neighborhoods, right? And I think, just the act of bringing people together to paint and meet one another and talk, especially during COVID, where the city emptied out. And, as I said to a guy, New York hadn't been this black and brown since the 80s, right? And so, there was a way of bringing people together after, this kind of, separation that I felt that the work really did. And it just activated people. But I think that is the point of all of, this is one of many, 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 many different projects that you've been doing around this question of color theory, right? And there are a whole other range of colors of blackness, of the reds and the greens and the blues that is connected to how you're thinking about it. But you this time you just dove into the blackness that I thought was just absolutely brilliant.
Oh, I'm going to quickly dovetail on a point there about this question of policing. And Amanda, it's throughout so much of your work, the many different ways that black people are policed, right? So urban renewal, redlining, there are sort of layers and layers and layers that have been ingrained in architecture, design, urbanism as a set of practices, processes, and ways that have significantly impacted so many people. And so really pushing that and providing, I think, visibility to exactly that issue is really so important in I think this project at Storefront, but really bridging across all of your work with color theory, what is happening to these buildings, how do we make this space visible? With the tulips, right? Well, how do we make that visible and help people understand the many ways that we've been policed and controlled and kind of the power dynamics? So I'm going to just pick up on that point. But yeah, and it's a through line.
Storefront also has a history of the facade being graffitied often, but in the instance of your work, it was only graffitied a couple of times. And I want to think, though, but seriously, think about what it means that because of the presence of your work, members of the public felt as though they were now stewards of that facade and now responsible for that facade as well. I think that kind of emerges from the mutuality through which the work was made, but also feels like another through line of your work is the way that it becomes this kind of vessel of care. And I wonder if you can kind of speak to, if you have a theory of why folks kind of left it alone.
Well, I have a few theories, and Jose can correct me if I'm wrong, but before we put the captions up, it actually was tagged more frequently than after the captions went on. So I think that there's something temporal about this moment just after, like Japhas calls it, the Pandalucian Revolimic, this dual revolution, pandemic reckoning, right? So there was a sensitivity to that, I think. But I think Andrés also beautifully outlined that, black is turned up. So there's potentially a fear of what it means to tag that. And then as I was listening, and I hadn't thought about this before, because it is so abstract and modernist with a kind of monochrome nature, but it really is graffiti. And so in a way, there's an ultimate reverence that you pay to another graph writer if you respect their work, right? You don't tag it. And so the interesting part, but the difficult part of a lot of the work that I make is it is very public and it is begging for engagement, but you can't stand there and absorb the responses. So I like there's kind of no way to know. We don't really know what that is, but we also had a very long conversation when considering doing this work about what it would mean to care for it if it was tagged. So I had an assumption that it would be the black body, and as we know, especially in that moment, that's not something that's cared for or respected. And so Storefront made a commitment to maintaining that wall as many times as it was going to be tagged, and we'd even talked about what would it mean to have certain people painting or caring for it over a period. But I also want to just commend Storefront because that was a kind of these questions about institutional critique or how will the institution be changed by a work or a project, and the commitment to that without knowing how that was going to happen, right? Like, it could have been tagged every day. It could have been, like things written across it. It could have been injurious in a different kind of way. And so that was a huge risk, to decide to do something. And then at the end of the day, just from a color sense, who doesn't want to tag black? Like, it's just perfect. It's like, it's that perfect canvas, right? So there was also that question of like, are you kind of inviting this double-edged sword? And so I was intrigued by that, but I think it could be, in the same way there's a myriad of kind of ways I've described blackness, there's an unknown quantity of reasons why it kind of unfolded in this way. And I think that was some of my fear, but some of the kind of allure of this kind of project.
I love that, thank you. I also wonder for you, Justin and Mabel, like how and why and to what extent do you think the insertion of blackness into the lived environment, into the built environment, kind of demands that folks navigate that space with a degree of reverence, with an acknowledgement of the sanctity of that space?
I mean, but I think isn't there something about place, though, that's important? Like, Jose knows I was super nervous. It's easy to do things on the south side of Chicago because that's me. So we're going to have a problem if you have a problem, right? Like, but I don't know. So I don't know Ken Mayer. I don't know. Like this is somebody else's neighborhood in a sense. And so it was also like, would it be not read at all or misread? There's something very different from this. I'm thinking about Daniel Martinez in the 90s at Cornell. He had a work, and the visceral reaction to this work was so strong that it created a Latino Living Center. We protested. Like this one thing was so was so heavily resisted, it birthed this whole other thing. And so I was also kind of thinking through that, like, does the place that you do these actions in, like what is the consequence of that, either missing the mark or kind of hitting a different mark?
No, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that the work is a kind of graffiti. Like, I think it's understood as a kind of marking, and that might have been why it wasn't tagged, because it was understood it kind of didn't belong there anyway, in a weird way. But I do think that is blackness in public space. If public space is the space of politics and the public, the ability to belong in that space has always been challenged, and I think the ways in which Black communities create Black counterpublics and other ways of gathering, of being political, of being social, religious, however you want to describe it, it inserts itself in very different ways. And so I think the provisional potential nature of that maybe just spoke to the graffiti artists. They got it. They got the point of how it was supposed to be there, as opposed to a kind of monumentality that has a permanence that is marking dominant narratives, right, of who's supposed to be there and what it is supposed to mean. Yeah, I mean, there was a very, very funny interplay between what was being showed on the screen in these white columns, about the permanence of the column and the ephemerality of the images, right, and what you could or couldn't see, but that's the dance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other layer of this question I think is really important is to acknowledge the degree of erasure of Black people in Black spaces, the contributions and literally building of spaces or cities or environments by Black people, and thinking about what are those layers, how do we engage those layers, decode those layers, sort of reimagine them for the future is something I think the project really is engaging with. Okay, yes, this space has erased, been colonized, dominated, all of the things, and is accepted as a dominant space, a white space. But there's a challenge that says, no, actually, the truth is, the reality is, there are many layers to this space, including Black space, right? And in fact, Black space can, should, and is able to be present and visible and engaged and activated as such. And so that is a process, and especially for public spaces, right? This was still ultimately on something like a building that is controlled by an organization that is allowing this to happen. that were happening, as we saw with all the Black Lives Matter murals all over the country that were also having different dynamics, there was a completely different conversation and process that was still about power, was still about agency. I'm from Indianapolis, the Black Lives Matter mural there, the city didn't allow the muralist to paint over the yellow line. And they're like, you have got to be kidding me. Right? That, people will figure it out. So like this kind of dynamic of what is allowed to happen in the space and through what regulatory power structures and agency structures are things that we also have to navigate. But again, it's so important to acknowledge the full histories of how our spaces have been made and how they've been regulated in doing this work.
I want to harken back to something you were mentioning about the site specificity of this work and how, of course, normally you're working in Chicago, color theory, redefining redlining, and I wonder if you could speak more specifically to the challenges of entering a new space and making this specific intervention in a place that you're not as familiar with.
I mean, that credit really goes to Jose and the Storefront team. I mean, I think it's hard even this short amount of time to go back to 2020. So we started this conversation in June. So that was just about the point where I was like, this is never going to end. I'm going to be in this house with these kids forever. Never going to go away. And these places keep talking about art projects, like MoMA and Storefront's like, what are they talking about? We never leave in these houses. So we had to, we really thought through, what if nobody can see this? So how do we make it, and why would you make something that nobody can see, and what is that going to mean? And so I think it was a lot of conversation about this being a kind of bridge to how we might come together again as different people. And so how could this help that process? And so it still was really nerve-wracking because so much of the work, I think my training as an architect, and then also what Justin's talking about, the site is so critical. And so I like to really feel like I understand the site, and part of that means you kind of belong to it. And so you have to just sit and do nothing. And I can remember when we were teaching, and we teach Perec, or we teach these things where like, you sit until you don't want to sit anymore. Like that's when you really get the space. Students come and they measure everything and they take a few pictures and then they go back to their desk and they make their little site models. And no, you got to just sit there and be bored and like have somebody ask you why you're there again and see what the kind of pace and the energy of the space is. And I didn't have any of that, so I had to rely on Storefront and had to rely on our kind of conversation about how the pandemic had really set the zero line again. Like nobody knows how to be anywhere. And so how can this thing steward in a way that we reimagine how to be in this place that probably had a rhythm, or not probably, had a rhythm, had a kind of culture and way that it operated. This was inserting something new to maybe start something new. And so that was appealing to think about ways that I would transfer this kind of understanding I have about sites that I typically intervene in into this place that I didn't have really any understanding of.
Absolutely. I also feel like across your practice, Amanda, you have this deep sensitivity to the fact that Black subjectivity, Black culture, Blackness itself are not always safe when brought into the public realm. And I think it brings up the question of opacity and secrecy. And I think what Black is This You Say is an opaque work on a structural level because the panels of the facade never rotate. I mean, they're not doors. Like, they never fully let you see what is happening inside. But then on an aesthetic and conceptual level, the work doesn't read as culturally Black until the audience brings their body in close enough physical proximity to read the captions. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there were particular audiences you were interested in being legible to versus opaque against.
I mean, it's tricky because that's exactly what the Instagram posts were doing. And so in my mind, the comments are like the panels. So you read the caption, and either you get it or you don't get it, and then the comments take you in a whole other place. And I can't remember, I think it was the one that said something like, don't try to use my black work to explain the mess you got going on over there, right? I think that was it. And there was a family friend who was so insulted. Somehow she thought I was talking directly to her. And so she was like, I can't believe after all these years you would think that of me, you know? And I think, and that was the first one where I was like, people don't realize that I'm talking in the third person, I'm talking about, like, that she really thought I was talking to her. And then they went in on her, as people do in comments. It's like, people in their feelings, folks got, you know, and so I feel like the spatial kind of parallel of that is people coming up close on something and then being like, you know, like looking around like, are they talking to me? You know, like, but it was inviting, right? Because it kind of fold out or they open up. So it invites you close and then it hits you. You know, I have a dear childhood friend, her favorite phrase is, I'm black, deal with me. And I'm not saying it the way she says it, because she's confrontational all the time. But it was like, so the opacity also is kind of like a challenge it's like, you know, I have this way of being, you know, really sweet and cute and grinning all the time. But like, I bring it, you know, so the wall is doing the same thing, or the captions were kind of inviting that kind of behavior. And so I never had really thought about it as a question of safety. It was more like knuckle up and guard your grill. Like, it was like, I'm bringing it, you think I'm not, and then you better be ready, because I'm ready. You know, so I think the spatial nature of a facade that both welcomes you in but resists you, it was a perfect kind of architectural foil for the concept of the work itself.
Absolutely. And I wonder for you, Mabel and Justin, what the kind of importance or function of opacity in the built environment is as it relates to Black subjects navigating it or inhabiting it.
Yeah, I love this thread of conversation, and it, you know, it connects to this idea of the storefront, and there's a history of, let's say, public space and Black bodies in public space and how they're mediated through elements in terms of our economy, our public interactions that are quite important. So this idea of the thickness or the transparency and opacity, again, have these really interesting layers and kind of history that we can think about. And you know, I was thinking about the Black Friday ads when you're like, you know, shopping and it's like Black Friday. And it's sort of this communication, or Urban Outfitters had in their storefront near their urban renewal advertising campaign. And I'm like, is this real? Which is something to do with, like, you know, fashion somehow with, anyway. But, you know, there are these communications that happen in space that are, you know, mediated and intentional. And I think what's so powerful about the work at Storefront is that intentional conversation, the invitation, that it's two-way, not one way, in so many ways that's not transactional, right? It's bringing you to another space, to a conversation, to a collective conversation that can be one that is for and about Black people and understanding and communicating at a level there, but also reaching out to the public. And I you know, it returns to this key framework of the public and the public responsibility that's there, and that the opacity actually becomes an instrument to have meaningful conversations about what do we have access to, what do we have exposure to, what do we have a responsibility to or not. And I think it invites that conversation to continue, and hopefully Storefront, it sounds like you're on that page, that it's a way for that conversation to continue. Who has access to these spaces, right? Who has access to make the transformations? Who has access to decide how the environment and our interactions in the environment are gonna transform, hopefully, right? And adapt to whatever it is. You know, this is a moment of, I forgot the pandemic, pandelution.
Pandelution, revolimic.
of the time, right? And there will be these things are going to keep happening in our society, and so how do we use these tools of opacity, of access, of communication for the challenges that we're going to continue to see expressed?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the question of opacity is very interesting, precisely because it's about, like, what you can't see or what you can't know or what, and I think, the idea of knowing is also about possession, right, and about property. And the thing that I think is interesting, Amanda, when you were talking about, well, I couldn't be there, I think, but that's okay, because you could travel there, you could imagine being there, you could, I think there is a sense of Blackness in its, its peripatetic condition of always moving and bringing with you, but also connecting with what's already there, that just allows to something to flourish in the moment and not have to plan ahead, not have to, own it first, not have to possess, not have to, it confounds that. And I think, there's something about, I can't stop thinking about your thesis at Cornell and the street and the way you were working with collage, right? And thinking about that storefront facade coming out of that understanding of the liveliness of the street and that everyone is bringing what they have out into that to make a very different kind of public that's not about possession, right? That's about something else, about contribution and about sharing and about caring.
And I think, I didn't think of it until just now, but it was intentional to use like third person and, and oscillate between these with the captions. But the fact that so many of them say you, so the person there's a mirror there. And so people then who are not Black for the first time potentially are questioning whether they can go inside a storefront. So there's an embodied sensation of like the reverse of this, right? Of like, can I come now? Am I allowed now? Like, a questioning where before there's always a kind of assumption and then we're the kind of accoutrements. It's like the reversal all of a sudden of like, well, who is this for? Because it says you and that's me, but do I know this experience? So there's a lot of kind of mirroring that was going on, even though there is the opacity.
I have one more question for y'all before we hand the stage over to Jamila and Justin 2.0. So in her essay, The Black Interior, Elizabeth Alexander writes that the Black interior is not an inscrutable zone nor colonial fantasy. Rather, it is inner space in which Black artists have found selves that go far, far beyond the limited expectations and definitions of what Black is, isn't, or should be. Tapping into this Black imaginary helps us envision what we are not meant to envision: complex Black selves, real and enactable Black power, rampant and unfetishized Black beauty. And Alexander goes on to ask, what do we learn when we pause at sites of contradiction, where Black creativity complicates and resists what Blackness is supposed to be? And I wonder, for each of you, how this work sort of complicates what we imagine a built environment that addresses and embraces Blackness should look like, and also where it should be, like thinking again about the fact that this is in Soho.
And I can start and say that the layers of this project, and knowing that there is, what you go there and you physically see, but you also may have access to knowing how did it happen, and the imagination that it took, the community that it took for that to happen is a very old story, because how this thing called humanity happened, where did it start? Right? Black people. So that, this idea of like that very deep imagination, ingenuity, just, complete wholeness that can be experienced in this sort of transformation of a space is so, so powerful. And to remember and to acknowledge the power in that, the agency in that, despite, right? So our history, or kind of the history of, Black people in America, right? There's so many despites. that we're navigating, but it is just so incredible to think about all of the power, agency, and creativity that has shaped these spaces, and that it is in so many different forms. It's not the commodified, singular, valued by whomever thing, right, or idea necessarily. It is so broad and so complex that I think that is, really the challenge when you're asking us all this question.
Yeah, no, thank you for that quote from Elizabeth, which is incredible. And I think, she's a poet, and the fact that she said selves, I thought was so powerful, because typically the self is always configured as singular, and I'm self-possessed, right? Like that is the notion of the West understanding of the self, and she just blows that out by saying selves, which I love, because it just says it's a collective, it's never singular. And what's amazing to be sitting here with these two is that we have taught together, we have collaborated together, we have I feel like the dialogues have been for decades at this point. And so work never comes from a singular genius, but always in collaboration and always in dialogue. And that's what I've always appreciated about what you do, Amanda, is that you make that public as opposed to, it being, it's my idea. And architecture is famous for that stuff. The genius, my building. And it's like, nah, you didn't do that. We did that. And I think that idea of selves and the ways in which you open up a multiplicity in that work at Storefront is really remarkable. Publics, not just a public.
Thank you. I think to answer your question, I'm going to go back to what you just said a few minutes ago, that thought of we kind of bring blackness with us, and I'm imagining this suitcase where wherever we are, we just unfold. You think it's like the guys in Harlem used to sell the stuff, and then they run off. That's it. That, for me, the hope is, my daughters, this generation, there's an agency where there's a feeling of not quite knowing what it means, but also kind of creating this movement and this revolution where, no, you're not going to talk to me like that. I will quit this job without another one. No, that's injurious language. I'm not going to tolerate. These things that we endured because we thought we had to in order to make spaces palatable for other people, that's over. So I don't quite know exactly what it looks like, but I feel like there's an agency that exists where, my daughters think it's normal to paint things that they don't own. That's what they've done their whole lives. They think, why not? They're like, well, let's paint it. They don't, you don't have to ask any permission. Just plant some tulips. I don't know who owns this lot. So, what is that kind of infusion? They represent an entire generation. And so I think for me, the ultimate would be that blackness, transcends, right? That you feel agency and freedom no matter where you are. It's where you are.
Absolutely. Can we have, I'm loud. Can we have one more round of applause for everyone? And now we would like to thank the Storefront team, the Cooper Union team, our awesome AV crew back there, and thank you to all of you as well for attending tonight. And with that, we wrap.